Hey guys, it's Muan, and this is my presentation Dispelling Controversy, an examination of COVID-19 and influenza based on a New York Times article written by Denise Grady. Okay, first a quick overview of COVID-19. As you all probably know already, the first COVID-19 cluster was discovered in Wuhan, China at the end of last year and labeled an emergent disease by the WHO soon afterward. The disease then quickly spread to numerous other countries and was declared a pandemic by the WHO in early March of 2020. As of March 27, 2020, there were about 100,000 cases and 5,000 deaths worldwide. In response, most countries are putting extreme limitations on the processes that help keep their economies healthy, and thus economies worldwide, including the US's, have begun to falter, with the US's GDP dropping 4.8% in the first quarter. To put that in perspective, the GDP growth rate for a healthy economy is about 2 to 3%. Most places, including the US, have also put social distancing measures in place to limit the spread of the virus as much as possible. These are only two of the many societal impacts of this pandemic worldwide. Okay, while that is all well and good, why does this presentation need to be made at all? Why do coronavirus and influenza need to be compared? It appears that many do not realize the severity of the situation we find ourselves in and the scope of this pandemic. The media, as well as many individuals in my experience, drastically underestimate the deadliness of this new disease, and thus are not taking the appropriate actions to protect themselves and those around them. This inability to discern truth from not plagues us in all areas of knowledge, as it is rooted in our advancements in communication technology. Nowadays, we can access huge amounts of information, more information than we could ever process in our entire lives, at the press of a button. This superabundance of information actually seems to have a rather negative effect on the pursuit of truth, as we often become lost and misguided in the flurry of ideas. Confusion and disunity soon follow, and we cannot consolidate under one truth when necessary, as our accounts of what that one truth is are disparate, and for good reason. Finding the truth is, simply put, hard, like finding the proverbial needle in a haystack. This leads to a whole host of problems, not the least of which is under-preparation, an attribute which is extremely detrimental, as we have already seen, in times like these. We need an objective assessment of the severity of COVID-19, and that is what this presentation tries to do by comparing it to influenza. However useful this comparison may be, that means nothing if it cannot be made. Here we have the general characteristics of each of these diseases, and I know it's a lot, so let me break it down. In the general symptoms category, we can very clearly see that there are a huge number of similarities between these two diseases, as of their 8 general symptoms each, they share 6. In addition, they have exactly the same methods of transmission and are of the same type of infection on 2 accounts, being viral and affecting the respiratory system heavily. Their serial intervals and incubation periods are not the same, but they are close enough to be comparable. So as you can see, these two diseases are incredibly similar, meaning a comparison of them can in fact be made. Here I have assembled the data from Grady's New York Times article, the 3 categories of which are mortality, contagiousness, and severity for both diseases. As you can see, COVID-19 is more potent than influenza across the board. However, before we make any conclusions, we must first verify whether or not this data is not necessarily correct, but close enough to correct to draw conclusions from. And it seems to be, as 135,000 COVID cases is an adequate sample size, and we already have trustworthy data on influenza because it has been around for so long. As a result, we can say COVID-19 is indeed that serious. The mortality rate alone is indicative as to the state of the situation, not to mention it's still being more contagious and more severe by a huge margin. Looking at COVID-19 hospitalization rates, hospitals will no doubt have to turn patients away, as there is no FDA-approved preventative or treatment measures that can be administered to patients other than supportive care, meaning hospital beds are occupied for long periods of time, raising mortality. This has already happened in places such as Italy and Spain. We must still keep in mind that this data is preliminary and thus almost certainly will be subject to change, so take these conclusions with a grain of salt. And just to be clear on how severity is measured for this study, for influenza it is a percent of cases hospitalized, and for COVID-19 it is percent of cases deemed severe or critical by a Chinese study with unknown criteria. Moving forward with the weight of this pandemic in mind, there are numerous steps I recommend both you as an individual and you as a member of society take moving forward. First and foremost, remain vigilant. Abide by the rules set forth by healthcare professionals and disease experts, regardless of what you believe to be true. Let them handle the decisions and abide by said decisions as devoutly as possible, as when you do not, you put more than just yourself at risk. You are no doubt familiar with these guidelines, but if you are not, they are listed here. Also recognize that conclusions and predictions drawn from accepted data may, and almost always are, at least somewhat inaccurate. It is very early in the projected lifetime of COVID-19, and there is still so much to be discovered, corroborated, and examined before we can claim our conclusions as sound. The media often contributes to this problem as well, as exaggeration is common in pursuit of a story. As for societal actions, I believe the foundation, nay, the foundation upon which the foundation sits, is a culture of information sharing and discourse in pursuit of truth, as truth allows us to make the correctly informed decisions that are so imperative at times like this. Additionally, a less abstract goal we can strive for is ensuring school and work requirements are still effective, but above all safe. Online classes are a challenge, no doubt, but a challenge we can and must overcome to limit the number of lives lost. These are my references. Thank you.